Hey there, welcome to another episode of Design Under Influence. It's great to have you with us. Today we're covering top three IT challenges that architecture, design, and engineering firms are facing. This is something that you probably have come across in your day-to-day running a business. And with 20 years of experience helping architects with IT, my co-host Boris Rappaport will help us unpack and give you some functional advice on how to overcome some of these challenges. Boris, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me on our show.
You're co-hosting, yeah. Let's dive right in. So let's just first of all list out the top three challenges. You and I talked pre-show and we kind of agreed. One is onboarding new employees. Two is managing software versions across all the computers in the company. And third is, of course, cybersecurity, which is a big topic right now. And we'll have some advice there. So we're going to take a few minutes to kind of talk about the challenge itself. Then Boris kind of help isolate a solution or your advice against dealing with that challenge. And then we're going to move on to the next one. So let's open without further ado, let's open with onboarding new employees. Where's the challenge? Why is that a problem? And how would you recommend going about it?
So I think the challenge, and this is most likely a challenge for every company and every business, but for architects and engineers in particular, the challenge is from an IT perspective, you need to, when a new employee starts, you need to have their computer properly set up with all the tools that they're going to be using as part of the job, right? You want somebody to come into the office and the first impression you want to make as a professional organization is you have all your stuff together. And since the computer nowadays is kind of the biggest time where we, the device we use the most to do our work and the tools that we use the most to do our work, that needs to be set up perfectly. And a lot of times we see people when they come to us from being a prospective client and then becoming our clients is they're struggling with, bringing new people on board just because of the variety of the tools, making sure that everything is properly installed, properly configured, and is actually there, right? Something is, the person's going to use is actually already installed and they can start using it the first day.
Okay. So it's the machine itself, as well as the software stack, we should call it software stack that comes with it, because each organization is unique. They have their own methods and processes and systems and how to sort of do design and all the other work related to collaboration on that design and pushing design out and things like that. So what have you seen that worked pretty well for companies that may not be our clients, but what are some of the good, best practices around onboarding new employees?
Well, I'm going to say have a checklist, right? You must have a checklist, and it could be, we can focus on the technology side in this conversation, but in general, right? Have a checklist for bringing a person on from day one, or not even day, like pre-day one, when they sign their offer letter, right? And all the way through when they actually start and go through orientation. Like all of those kind of steps need to be identified and planned and checklisted, because that way you're not going to forget to do something, right? Okay. So
let's talk about a couple of things specifically on this computer and tech setup checklist. What's some of the things people miss you recommend people to make sure they don't forget to add to that checklist?
Well, and this is true probably for, firms that are over 10 employees. But, once you get to 10, 20 employees, you can have various groups that work on maybe different projects or have different tool sets. So you want to make sure that that checklist actually identifies what the role of the person is going to be. And based on that role, which software they're going to need to use. So, if they're a designer and you're predominantly working with Revit and some other tools like Lumion and Enscape, make sure that those are the tools, or SketchUp, right? If they're a project manager, then they have other tools, mainly, any project management software or Excel or things of that nature. So making sure you can differentiate between what the role of the person is going to be and identifying the tools that they're going to use is really, I think, is really critical to do that beforehand and not after the person starts.
Gotcha. What about licensing? So once you identify the tool stack, the tech stack, I should say, or tool set that this person will utilize, project manager or whatever, based on their job, what about licensing and buying the licenses and making sure that all that is squared away?
Right. So that would be the next step. Once we know what we're going to need to give this person, we need to go and either find a license that we already procured that this person can use, or if we don't have it, we need to go and purchase it. Right. And that has to be, again, done beforehand, not when a person starts and tries to launch it. And then it says, hey, you don't have access because you don't have a license. Right. That does not make a great first impression.
Okay. So let's say all that is good to go. Now, the internal IT or external IT typically helps with that. Is there anything like what is the responsibility of a company versus their IT provider when it comes to onboarding new employees? I guess I want to kind of delineate that. How does that, like, how do you gel that together very well?
Well, again, from the company standpoint, figuring out where that person fits in within the structure of the company, right? Whether it's a designer, where it's, an admin person, an HR person, or, project manager, right? Figuring out that role, figuring out the tool set. I think that information needs to be provided by the company, whether it's HR or, whoever does that initial step of onboarding, to the technologists who can then fulfill that request and install the needed software and, finish up the provisioning of all the accounts as needed.
Gotcha. And one last piece on that first challenge to be that people need to overcome. Any follow-up, any recommendation on post onboarding? So for example, let's say the onboarding has happened, employees started. Anything after that you recommend to sort of keep in mind or do to ensure the success of that onboarding?
And usually there is some sort of orientation process that happens either right when they start or, that first or second day, or maybe a couple of days, right? Where the person comes to the office or maybe now remotely. The HR person or another trainer goes through, to some of the basic processes and procedures that they need to start doing their work. And then during that step, some of the basic training is also provided of how to log in certain systems and how to open certain files. And this is where our files live. And this is what we do, in this sense. So kind of workflow training, there must be an orientation process to get the person into the workflow of the firm and understanding all of the tools and how to access them.
Gotcha. All right. So pre-onboarding is a checklist that identifies a tool set. Onboarding is actually acquiring the right licenses and making sure everything is installed and testing, make sure the machine can launch those applications. And then post onboarding is the orientation and workflowing, and just basically get people in the swing of things. So that's kind of, to box it out, that seems to be like 1, 2, 3 step process. Let's hit the next one. Managing software versions. This could be big or it's not that big. I mean, give us a little bit of a scope of what kind of a problem is this? So I guess it's managing different software versions across machines or computers within the organization.
Right. I think it's a big problem, or a bigger problem that we tend to realize. And I will explain myself. In an architecture firm or an engineering firm, some of the tools that are being used, like the Autodesk tools, have different versions, right? So we can start with, let's just say, either AutoCAD or AutoCAD Civil 3D or Revit. And those could be major different versions. So usually based on years. So it's either AutoCAD 2018, AutoCAD 2019, AutoCAD 2020, and so on. But there's also minor versions, 2020.2.1, for example. And a lot of times a company will think about standardizing across the major version, because what happens if you launch, a 2020 project in 2022 software, it will automatically pop up a message and say, hey, this is older. In order to open it here, you need to upgrade it. And basically, it will ask you to upgrade it. Well, guess what? When you're upgrading it, it now becomes a 22 project. So previous versions can no longer open it. So if somebody created it in 2020 and they only have 2020, but you then open it in 22 and you upgrade it, that person who originally created it in 2020 doesn't have access to it anymore. So they need to upgrade theirs to 2020 as well. So this is one of the challenges, right? And I think many firms kind of have workarounds for that, communication and things like that. But standardizing on software is very important to eliminate that particular challenge, because that could be, we've seen it where people just don't know and they do it, and then it turns out that the project now can be worked on because the consultants didn't have the right version. Like, it creates a whole it creates a bunch of headaches where, a lot of times we just have to go back to backup and kind of restore it into a previous version again. So
there's a lot of wasted effort, and that's not billable hours, and not getting work done. It's talking about work, not doing work. Okay. And so let's unpack this a little bit more. What should be, like, give us the blueprint, a very kind of core blueprint for what the policy should look like. And also want to make sure we don't forget consultants. So internal and then external.
What we try and put in place is a policy where, we first work with you to identify which versions, because, a lot of times architectural projects and construction projects take a long time. So sometimes you may still be working on projects into like construction administration, even though the design piece is already done, but you still have your models and you still have your documents into construction administration. I apologize. And, the project is like 5 years old. So it was started in Revit 2016. Everybody's doing work in Revit 2016. But it's now, 2021, and you're still basically using Revit 2016. So we're trying to identify those projects that are kind of taking longer, so that we can still, have legacy versions in place to make sure that people can still access those older projects. And then also making sure that with the new tools, people have access to the new tools. So a lot of times what you'd find is we have standardization across the board, where every kind of computer that an architect would use or a designer would use has, Revit version, let's say 2016 through 2022, right? Or, and once we identify that those 2016 projects are no longer there, then we can uninstall 2016 and kind of maintain the versions going forward. So that's one piece of it. One other thing I want to touch on is the minor version upgrade, minor version standardization, because a lot of times what happens is there are updates, as I mentioned, for the software. People just install them independently if they have access or rights. And, if I'm running Revit 21, .2.3, and somebody's running Revit 21.1.2, what people don't think about, even though they're both on Revit 21, and it doesn't complain about upgrading the project, is a lot of times what can happen is the person on a different version saves the model, and then when the other person opens it, because they open it with a different version, it just corrupts the model, right? And then nobody can access it at all. So making sure that the minor versions match up is also very important across the organization to keep the workflow moving and keep the models from getting corrupted.
And how would you recommend going about doing that?
You basically have a schedule. So again, our best practices kind of don't, just because it's the latest version, don't necessarily, just because there's an update for it, you don't necessarily have to install the update, right? Because a lot of times the updates, unless you specifically need to fix something, the latest version is not always the greatest, and it may have other bugs that you didn't have in the previous version. So what we do is we basically say, okay, if we have a ticket history and we have an issue with Revit that is fixed in the next release, then we would say, okay, so this fixes this issue. We are going to schedule an upgrade, and usually we schedule something either for once a quarter or once every half year. So we have a maintenance window to where we can install these updates. We're going to schedule this update, roll it out across all our organization, right? So every computer will get this update so that everybody's kept on the same version. If there isn't a real need for it, there's no feature or a fix that is required for people to perform their work. We're just going to keep it at the level that we're at.
Gotcha. All right. So have a policy and a process to ensure that subversioning is not happening ad hoc. It's happening in an organized and structured way, so people's stuff don't break. And again, we don't have kinks in the workflow that essentially cost money and reduce profitability, and it's just a distraction. And eliminate those. So that sounds good. Now let's hit security. So cybersecurity has been a big issue. We hear this all the time. It's kind of nice, out of sight, out of mind kind of topic where it doesn't, unless it touches your company. And we're all the same way, right? And this touches, you're like, whatever. It's kind of out there. Maybe I'm too small, or my chances, my risk level may be lower, or whatever. You just choose not to think about it. Now, I think it's becoming more clear right now that this mindset is very dangerous, and you're putting your own company at risk. You're putting your people at risk. So it's tough. It's tough not to think about it. It's tough also to think about it because you're not an expert. I'm not an expert, right? We are as a company an expert, but you're not, right? You're an architect, you're an engineer, you're a designer, you know something, but it's tough. So people like your cyber insurance broker would be a good resource. Your IT provider would be a good resource to have the conversation, the risk conversations. Like, what is my exposure? What is my insurance cover? We've already done a bunch of content on this and talked about all kinds of stories and situations that happen with architects, specifically because you have all these partners, all these consultants, and you are the target because your company doesn't need to get hacked. You're one of your consultants or someone who's working on the project, collaborating on the project with you. If they get hacked, this will come back and cause huge problems for your company. So it's not even just you. So you need to understand your risk exposure. And so what I wanted to refer to, Boris, is unless you have some fresh data or anything else, I'd want to refer folks to the course that we have done. This is free for the employees, and we highly recommend you let your team go through it's a 4-module course. It's pretty simple. There's video, there's copy to read, and it's like, that's your first baseline. Then I would recommend you have a sit down with your insurance broker, specifically who understands cybersecurity. We have a really good one we can recommend. We'll link it out in this article. His name is Zach Waters with Black Swan. He's great to talk to. We're talking to him ourselves to understand our liability and how much we need to increase that. So this is like, as business owners, you cannot have your hand in the sand on this one. And we're kind of eating our dog food here as well. And the last piece I'm going to mention is that we've done 3 videos, and then we have an ebook. So something that, or I guess a download or a PDF, something that you can download and peruse at your leisure. Again, we'll link it out here. Very important piece. Those things that we recommend doing are pretty basic and very doable. Problem is, a lot of people don't do them because they're, it seems like it's second nature. No, it's not. It needs to be thought through and implemented by you, the founder, by you, the founding team, the management team, whoever. And then the team needs to be trained, and constantly that training needs to constantly update. So every quarter, there's got to be some kind of security workshop, in my opinion, something that you get together and watch. My previous companies, we've done, a Monday breakfast club where, would be a topic every week, different topic, different speakers, whatever. But once a quarter, we would talk about security. And those are my recommendations, Boris. I'm sorry, kind of stealing this particular, because we piece of the show, because we've done so much of this already. And we're so deep in it right now that I wanted to sort of convey those points. But do you have any updated or any other advice outside of what we already recommended and done so far?
No. I think you got it all covered. Those are very, very good steps to follow to make sure that, you keep your company up and running and you keep your data secured. And as you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be you who gets hacked, right? It could be one of the consultants could be the owner of the project, but you may then get exposure through them, which we've seen happen before. So, right, it's making sure you understand like how big your exposure and how much of a risk you're facing by just running your business using technology. Because all we did was pen and paper, and all we needed to do was lock the doors. That would be a lot more secure. But nowadays, you have to use technology. That's what we're here for. That's how we help. But you have to understand all the risks that go with it. So I think all your recommendations align. I'm just going to say that I think the biggest risk, or actually maybe two most important risks from a standpoint of security for architecture and engineering firms, is not necessarily that you're going to get hacked, because a lot of architects feel they don't have any sensitive data, which I'm going to argue with. But it's more of getting ransomware and getting your project files encrypted and not being able to do work for weeks, and not being able to bill, and have stress and try to catch up, not being able to meet the deadlines. Ransomware is probably the risk number one, and number two is some sort of scam that comes from one of the consultants or the building owner or contractor that you're working with. Once they get hacked, they can send out scams to other people on the project, and you may be exposed to that scam and inadvertently send money to people you shouldn't have sent to.
Yeah.
So those are major risks.
Yep. And we've seen those time and time again. And then, what's next? What's the next thing they're going to come up with? So follow our advice, read our stuff, download the ebook, send your employees through the course. It's free. You don't need to be our client. We just need to do it. We feel like we need to, do what we can to prevent this from happening to your company. And if you need help, or you need us to do your security assessment, we're always here. We'd love to earn your business. Get archit.com, click contact, and we'll be speaking to you in a couple of hours. So with that, Boris, appreciate your time. I think this is we had some good advice. There's 3 things that people will need to overcome as engineering or architect companies. And again, if you guys need advice or help, just contact us and we'll see what we can do. It's getarchit.com. Until next time, thank you very much for watching and listening. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.